Well, I stand up here, and Dewey is so good with technology, and so I brought out the blackboard or the whiteboard, whatever it is, and so you have to put up with all that. I've taught for 50 years, but getting back in the groove to teach is just I don't know what it is. Challenge. Can you hear me back where you are there? Okay. And so we're gonna start this class. We were assigned chapters, I believe, 19, 20, 21, and 22 of Genesis, the first book of the Bible that talked about creation. So here I am trying to come up with some really important lessons of that many chapters. And so we're going to give that a shot. And I'm going to, most of us are familiar with the events that happened in Genesis because we have studied it from years ago. And so I'd like to hear kind of your thoughts on some of this. And so we're going to start with chapter 19, but I'm going to draw a little map up here if I can. It is going to be a rough map. Okay, if you go to Southern Europe and around Palestine and on down in Northern Africa, this area right here is this is the Mediterranean Sea. Everybody, can you recognize that?
Yes, absolutely.
With all the detail. Okay, this is the Med. All right, and from here on down, you got Damascus up here, roughly, and you've got Jerusalem down here, and you've got the Sea of Galilee, I'll say right in here somewhere. Jordan River goes down to the Dead Sea and all of that. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
You kind of got roughly what that view is. Well, where we're talking about primarily today is this area here is where Abraham and Isaac and all those stories today, and Lot. That's where all of those things occur typically. Now, in the news today, what place in the Middle East are we hearing a lot about? Okay, and Gaza, right? And all the terrible things that are happening over there, all the loss of life, and the terror of October the 7th, and all of that kind of stuff. Well, that's where that in that area is where Abraham lived. If you sort of make the connection, if you can kind of get your mind wrapped around that a little bit. And so, you've got and I'll sort of add to this map as we go along, as much as I can. And so we'll kind of look at that. So we're going to look at let's start a little bit in chapter 19. If you guys just look at that chapter, what's going on in chapter 19? I mean, you don't have to do the whole story, but just generally, it's a story about what? Yeah, it's the story about Lot and the Sodom and Gomorrah, right? Now, who hasn't heard about Lot and the Sodom and Gomorrah? Okay, well, what I want us to try to figure out is what in the world, what lessons can we learn from that? Because that's what it's in here for, is for us to learn and point our way into eventually the kingdom of Christ, because that's the end of the plan. So if we look at verse 1, I'm not going to read all of these because there's so much to read, but you remember how the two angels came down to Sodom, and Lot was, he had taken that land somewhere around this area right here, around the river of Jordan, okay? Because that was most fertile. You remember he took the good land, and Abraham took this land up in here, okay? And so Abraham lived there, wandered around there. He just doesn't seem to settle in at all. Of course, God had told him to wander around in there and look. And so we see Lot, we see Sodom and Gomorrah right in here somewhere. Actually out here. And so Lot saw them, and he came to the door. You remember? He came to the door and said, "Come on in." All right. No, I'm just kind of paraphrasing this. I don't think I need to. We don't need to come in. We need to tell you that if you know the word, you understand the word hospitality, okay? Hospitality was a big deal, evidently here. So big that I don't understand some of the things that Lot even promised here or said in that discussion. But in about verse 2 or 3, he said, come on in. So they said, no, we're going to spend the night in the square. And so, but Lot urged them. He was strong in his urging. He said, no, come on in. So he prepared a feast for them and cooked some unleavened bread and some meat. And all of a sudden they got ready for bed. And what happened? You remember?
The whole city came up.
Yeah. Knock, knock, knock. You know.
Every man.
That's right. Yeah. We don't. It's hard to understand all of this, but some of the townspeople still looked upon Lot as an alien. That's the word my Bible uses. And they said, "You've got visitors in there, and we want them out here so that we can mess with them." Okay. And so Lot said, "Oh my goodness, no, you can't do that because they would destroy my vow of hospitality to them." And so they insist, and in fact, they get so rough they're going to grab because Lot closes the door when he comes out, and so they grab Lot and says they're going to take care of him first. Well, you know as well as I do that the angels reached out, grabbed Lot, and brought him in and gave him the message that he needed to hear. And you remember what the message was that they told Lot? Roughly, you know, there's a lot of words here. Yeah. They brought him in, and so what happens to those guys that were trying to break into his house and get his family?
Blinded.
Yeah, they were blinded because this is the hard part. Lot says, "Don't bother my guests. You can have my 2 daughters." That is really hard to explain. You know, and we can't. I mean, all it says is it tells you that because I cannot wreck my vow of hospitality. And so they were insistent, and so on, and so they were blinded, and so Lot and the 2 angels have this discussion, and about verse 12, the 2 men said to Lot, "Who else do you have here? You have a son-in-law, your sons and daughters, whomever you have in the city, you bring them in because I'm about ready to destroy this town." And I'm sure that got Lot's attention pretty carefully. He says, "Because their outcry has become so great before the Lord that the Lord has gone out and spoke to his son, and so the Lord is going to destroy us, sent us to destroy it." So Lot went outside, but well, these guys were all blind now. They weren't going to cause any problem. So Lot goes out, and what does he do? I mean, what would you do? You'd go talk to your sons-in-law, wouldn't you? Or your future sons-in-laws, because the girls were not married yet. So he goes out, and he says, they're going to, the implication is, God is going to destroy this city. Don't you want to come with us and save yourselves? What did they think Lot was doing?
Joking.
They thought he was joking. That's not going to happen. And so in verse, mine says the word jesting in verse 14. Get out of the place, the Lord's going to destroy it. And so they stayed the night. And morning dawned, the angels urged Lot, saying, up, take your wife and your 2 daughters who are here, or you're going to be swept away in the punishment of the city. How did Lot respond? He hesitated. I mean, Lot was tied to that city, to those cities, Sodom, and I guess it was Sodom, wasn't it, that he actually lived in. And so he hesitated. So the men, I like this idea, they seized his hand and the hand of his wife and the hands of his daughters, for the compassion of the Lord was upon him. I think that's a pretty good picture of God's care for us. They weren't. Lot was hesitating. I don't know what he was unsure about. Lot was a fearful man. He was fearful all the time, And so the angels take the hand of the wife, of Lot's wife, and takes the hands of the 2 daughters, and they leave and they start out. And what does Lot do? He pulls an Abraham, doesn't he? You remember how Abraham bargained with the Lord? If you find 50, 45, 40, what, all the way down to 10? You know, he said, would you save the city? And God said, yeah. They couldn't even find that many. They couldn't even find 10. And so the destruction was assured. And so in about verse 16, compassion of the Lord was upon him. And they brought him out and put him outside the city. When they had brought them outside, one said to him now, one of the two angels said, run, escape. Okay, we're going to destroy, God is going to destroy, we're going to destroy this city. Your servant has found favor, Lot says. You've magnified your loving kindness, but would you do me a favor? What's the favor Lot asks? Do you remember enough of that story?
Let me escape to this little city.
Yeah, let me go to this little city out here. And it's a little city, right, sort of right down in here somewhere. Would you let me go there? Because I am afraid your destruction is going to catch up with me, because they told him to go to the mountains. And Lot says, well, I'm afraid to do that. Don't understand all that, but it's in the story. And what do the angels say?
Fine.
Yeah, they said, okay, we will assure you that little city Zoar, Z-O-A-R, will not be destroyed. And so off they go. Well, what happens, interestingly enough, on the way?
His wife.
Yeah, again, I don't understand that. You know, his wife turned around and looked, you know, very human thing to do, but lack of faith for sure, and turned into a pillar of salt, whatever that is. So, but there's no reaction of Lot recorded here. If I saw it, of course, I don't know, maybe if his wife was behind him, maybe he was afraid he would turn around and look there, I don't know. But she died on the way. And then, yes, James?
I've heard that there is modern evidence, of archaeological evidence of these brimstones and burning rocks and stuff still evident there in that location.
Yeah, I've heard that too, James, and it makes you sure, rely on the validity of this statement or this occasion. Yeah, Jess?
Interesting to note the angels physically pulled them out of the city. Once they are out of the city, the angels leave them on their own.
Yeah.
Which says, God sometimes is going to compel us to do something.
Yeah.
The other times he's leading us to trust us on our own.
Yeah. Once he took them by the hand and took them outside the city, they were on their own. And I don't know whether all that, whether even that loneliness scared Lot anymore. For all of a sudden, he understood the compassion of God, and I think that again is a lesson for us. God is compassionate. He has done everything he can to save us. All we have to do is respond to that faith, and we're saved. I mean, it's kind of simple in that way. All they had to do was walk into Zoar or into the mountains, and they were saved. Well, how long we don't know how long Lot stayed at Zoar, Z-O-A-R, Zoar or Zoar, one of those two. How long did he stay in Zoar? Do we know? We don't know. He stayed there a while, and then he was overtaken by fear again. So he left and finally went up to the mountains. All right. Once he got there, we have this really unusual story about how the daughters felt like somehow or other in verse, let's see, about verse 30 and onward, Lot went up from Zoar, stayed in the mountains, his two daughters with him, because he was afraid to stay in Zoar. I'm not sure why. We're not told that, but he stayed in the cave, and his two daughters. So they were cave dwellers for a while. And in the meantime, something unusual happened. The two daughters decided that they needed family, and so in their wicked way, they laid with their father, and they had two children. Now, the reason that is important is because of the names. Do you know who one of them is over here on the west side, right in here, and the other one is right down here. Two countries. If you see there, the children they had became the founders of two countries that were forever in the side of Abraham and God's people. Remember, it tells you there. Do you know who they are in the last verse?
Moab and Edomite.
Yeah. One of them was called Ammon. I believe it's M-M-O, it may be A-M-O-N. Okay. And the other one was, remember? Yeah, Ben-Ami, but we call it the Ammonites, don't we? Well, actually, Ammon there, and Moab is the other one. So, all from that little incident come the city-states of Moab and the Ammonites, and they were forever in the side of God's people. Okay. Then we get to anybody have any comments on 19? So why is that story in there then? Why is that story about Lot in the scriptures, do you think?
Helps explain the enmity that persists to this day.
Yeah. Israel is still having that kind of problem to this day. So God has compassion on his followers. Anything else you could remember you think is important about that particular episode?
Well, they grew up in Sodom. They were influenced. They were part of the culture.
Yeah. I don't know how long it took Lot to be captured by that culture of Sodom and Gomorrah, but he evidently was and was comfortable there. And unfortunately, it did. He had a hard time leaving it. Somebody complained to God about it, and God heard that and had compassion on Lot. Because we know Lot was Lot, as far as I know, was a good man. Who was he, by the way?
The nephew of Abraham.
Yeah, he was the nephew of Abraham. Abraham's father's brother, and he died. If you remember, so Abraham just took him under his wing and took him to the promised land there. Okay, yeah.
When I took a trip to Israel, I was taking a bus in Jordan down toward the coast, and we got down about even with the bottom of the Dead Sea, where Sodom was. We were probably 50 miles west of there, or east of there. The bus stopped, and we got out, and as far as you could see were cinders to this day.
Yeah.
I mean, it sent chills down.
Isn't that something? That's kind of what you were saying, James. He said they stopped the bus and they got out and walked around, and as far as the eye could see were just cinder rocks where that was destroyed. Yeah, Jess?
To me, Sodom and Gomorrah is certainly ultimately a slippery rock. I can't imagine that Sodom and Gomorrah were an issue this gradually got involved.
Yeah.
Things change, the more they practiced evil, the more they wanted evil. Temptations continue to grow greater and greater. Satisfaction with one thing becomes dissatisfaction, so they grow for something else. It's a big thing.
Yes. And the book of Romans said, and that is so true, it just captures us, draws it in like a hungry bear, and God finally, just gave them over. Romans gave them over. Because they went from, I don't know what, to brutality and being lecherous. You name the evil, they seem to have been doing it there, and Lot got carried into that. I don't think he did that because he seems to have kept his nobility and his faith in God, but he was called into that for sure.
I can't remember where the scripture is, but somewhere it says that it vexed that righteous man Lot.
It said what?
That it was vexing to that righteous
Yes.
man Lot.
Yeah. Where is that? Anybody knows? Is that in Hebrews? Where the evil of Sodom and Gomorrah was bothering Lot day and night. Vexing, I think, is the word that she used. And another time, you remember God, you said, boy, even he pointed to a city and said, even they're going to be Lot and Sodom and Gomorrah is going to be better off than these people who rejected Christ. And so it's brought into this story many times. Yeah.
Well, in chapter 19 and 1929,
Uh-huh.
it says God honored Abraham's request for Lot. I think that's an important point, that when we pray for those that we love and everything, God listens to us, and we can still have influence on people and help them.
Yeah.
And God had mercy on Lot because of Abraham.
Because of Abraham. Yeah, Abraham, there's no doubt about it. Abraham was a solid, faithful man all of his life, and that faithfulness carried over to Lot, and maybe God's attitude toward Lot. Okay, let's go to chapter 20, because in chapter 20, we get into another story. And again, now Abraham is wandering all over this land in here, it seems like. I tried to follow a little bit, this town and this town and this town, and I just kind of gave up on that and said, well, he just wandered all over here. Set up his tent, moved his cattle and his sheep over there, and that's where he stayed for a while. But he got into this area right here. Gaza, in those day and age, you ever hear of the Philistines?
Yeah.
You know, they were mean dudes. You remember they if you were a captive, they'd skin you. You know, literally skin you. They would hang you on a wall. I mean, they were mean. Well, that's where Abraham, maybe not at that point, but there does seem to be some adherence to God in that thing because of this one guy called Abimelech. He's kind of, I don't know what you would call him, maybe a warrior king or something. He evidently feels like he controls this area. Okay, and so in chapter 20, he and Abraham they have a connection, a covenant. So in chapter 20, and if I don't hustle, I'm not going to get to the real chapter we need to get to. Abraham, again, is in, it's called the land of Negev, and he settles in there, and all of a sudden, he looks up and he's missing something. He's missing his wife, okay? Because Abimelech took her, stuck her in his harem. But he didn't do what ordinarily they would do to the women in the harem. He was kept from, what's the word I'm after? Destroying the reputation of Sarah, because God, in verse 3, said, God came to Abimelech in a dream of the night and said to him, you are a dead man. If you know God say that to me, I think that would get my attention. And Abimelech says, what? You know, I haven't come near to her. And he says, then he calls out to the Lord. So there was some connection with God here. Lord, will you slay a nation even though blameless? And so many words. I didn't touch her. Okay. And God said, I know, I told you in a dream, but and so God had stopped. They weren't able to have children or nothing. And in verse 7, restore the man's wife, for he is a prophet. God says in this dream, and he will pray for you, and you will live. So he got a way out, didn't he? You know, God, through this dream, gave Abimelech a way out. You get a hold of Abraham, he'll pray for you, and you will be forgiven, and you will not surely die. So, I don't know, I think I would have rose up in the middle of the night, but Abraham, in verse 8, Abimelech rose early in the morning, called all the servants, particularly Abraham, and said to him what? What have you done to me, Abraham? Said, did I do anything to you? You tricked me. You deceived me. And so in the long line of deceptions, and Abraham, he said, you didn't tell me this woman was your wife. You told me she was your sister. And so what does Abraham say? Yeah, she is my sister. How is that? How is she a sister?
Same father, different mother.
Yeah, same father,
But not the same mother.
different mother. I have no idea who her mother is. Maybe it's listed somewhere. I don't know. But she said she actually is my sister. And but I married her. She's my wife. And so he restored Abraham to Sarah to Abraham. And verse 15, Abimelech said, behold, my land is before you. Settle wherever you please. And so they exchanged money and they exchanged livestock. And so Abraham in verse 17 prayed to God, and God healed Abimelech and his wife and his maids so that they were able to bear children. So I don't know how long they were in that area for them to realize they weren't going to have kids, but it was probably several months. So that little episode in Abraham's life closed, and we get to chapter 21, and the great promise is fulfilled. Remember what happened in chapter 12? What God promised Abraham? Yeah, I'm going to make you, Abraham, the father of nations. I'm going to make you have children, the number you can't even count. And so that was, you remember Dewey put that little chart up here, was it last week or week before, how old Abraham was when he got that promise and left? 75, wasn't it? So now Abraham is getting up there. He is now either right at 100 or close to 100, and Sarah is 89 or close to 90, one of the two. That's pretty old to have kids, okay? And but it's not too old to enjoy and believe in God's word, and that's what Abraham did. All through the Bible, Abraham is equated with faith, being faithful, listening, responding to the faith that you have. And so we finally, in verse 21, we find the promise is fulfilled, and Abraham becomes the father, and Sarah becomes the mother. So verse 21, then the Lord took note of Sarah as he had said, and the Lord did for Sarah as he had promised. Now what did he promise her? A child, okay, because she was childless. And that meant everything to her and to the women of that age. So Sarah conceived, bore a son to Abraham in his old age. At the appointed time, God has a plan, and he carries it out regardless of the time. It's been, 25 years, roughly, or better, since God made that promise to him. And so, okay. He had the baby. Abraham, what's the first thing he does? Circumcises Isaac, because that's what God asked him to do or told him to do. And so that's in verse 6. God, and Sarah says, God has made laughter for me. Everyone who hears will laugh with me. What does that have to do with anything? Yeah. What's Isaac's name mean? Laughter. He laughs. Now, the first time Sarah laughed, I'm not sure it was out of joy. It was probably out of, are you kidding me? You remember? That kind of thing. I don't want to overread that at all, because she's always a good, faithful woman. But, hey, she's 90 years old. Or at the time, she wouldn't have been that old. But now, she's 90 years old. And so she said, God has made laughter for me. This time, it's an expression of what? Joy. And people are going to laugh and realize that I am a happy woman. So I'm just going to call this boy, we're just going to call this boy Laughter. So that's Isaac's name. That's what it means. And so the child grew in his weaned. How old were these kids when they were weaned? Probably
3.
Yeah, probably 3, 4, 5. It was weaning was at the point where breastfed milk was no longer necessary. It was food outside the body. Okay, and so, hey, it was time to wean the child, Isaac. So what does Abraham do?
Made a great feast.
Throws a great feast. He is one happy guy. She is. Made a great feast, and on that day, Isaac was weaned. Okay, in verse 9, Sarah is out watching the kids in the yard, and what does she notice?
Ishmael.
Now she notices Ishmael, the first son, the one who I think James mentioned last week, something about sort of the father of the Palestinians. She noticed that Ishmael was, my version says mocking, others say playing. That he noticed they were out there playing, and was it somehow or other that bothered Sarah. So what did she do? Yeah, verse 10, therefore she said to Abraham, drive out this maid and her son, for the son of this maid shall not be an heir with my son Isaac. Well, there's a captivity there that's worthy of love for sure. But drive this woman out. Send her away. this is Sarah, the one who gave the Hagar to her husband to have a child. They were kind of impatiently prodding God along. And so, how did Abraham respond? How would you respond? That's my son. Why? You know, how can I do that? So he says in verse 11, the matter distressed Abraham greatly because of his son, because of Ishmael. But God said to Abraham, do not be distressed because of the lad and your maid. Whatever Sarah tells you, listen to her, for through Isaac your descendants will be named. Okay? So you said, go ahead and listen to Sarah. What that means is, go ahead and send them away. Now, that would be hard, sending your son away. Okay? But remember, Abraham believed God, and he now knew that Isaac was a descendant that would be named. And in verse 13, out of the son of the maid I will make a nation also, because he is your descendant. So later on in this chapter, we'll find out what happens to Ishmael. So Abraham rose early in the morning again, took bread, skin of water, gave them to Hagar, put them on her shoulder, and gave her the boy. She didn't put the boy on her shoulder. This boy is probably, about 13 years old? He's a little big to be carried around like a baby. But she can carry the bread and the water. And put him on her shoulder, gave her the boy, and sent her away. And so she departed and wandered about in the wilderness of Beersheba. Okay? They can't get away from this wandering area out in here. They just wander around in there. Okay? And so she runs out of water. She runs out of bread. And what does she do? What would you do?
Sit down to die.
Wait till I die.
You just kind of wait to die. There's no water out there, nothing to eat. So she sets her son, Ishmael, under a bush. Yeah. And remember, you see pictures and it looks like Ishmael's a baby. Ishmael's not a baby. He's 13 or 14 or whatever, 12, in that area. And he's under that bush. And what does she do?
She cries.
And she starts crying. And she walks over here about what? A bow shot. Would that be maybe 100 yards, 200 yards, something like that? Because she couldn't bear to see what? That son die. She just couldn't see it, bear it. So she was fully convinced that was the end of things. But it wasn't the end of things. And in verse 17, God heard. What did God hear? Yeah, you'd think he would hear her crying, wouldn't you? And he does, I'm sure. But he really hears the lad crying. He says, God heard the lad crying, and the angel of God called to Hagar from heaven, said to her, if I said to my kid, what is the matter with you? Usually, what's the tone of my voice? What in the world are you doing? Why are you doing that? I don't think that's it. I don't think that's the tone of here. I think God is really feeling compassion for this woman. What is the problem? What's the matter? Although, obviously, he knows. For God has heard the voice of the lad where he is. Verse 18. Arise, lift up the lad, hold him by the hand. Now again, he's not talking about a baby here. Grab the boy by the hand. I will make a great nation of him. Wow. Okay. Now she hears the promise. I'll make a great nation out of this lad. And so God opened her eyes, and what'd she see?
A well of water.
Yeah, a well of water. Now, how she didn't see that hand? She was worried about existing. She was worried about the welfare of her son, I would guess. And all of a sudden, God opens her eyes where she can see, and there's a well. Does that remind you of any other stories that we see in the Bible? Early on, who saw the ram caught? Just like this story is another story. Verse 19, God opened her eyes. She saw a well of water, and she went and filled the skin with water and gave the lad a drink. That's all we know. Okay? So what happens for years and years? They wander around in this wilderness. And what does Ishmael become? An archer. Doesn't that? It's kind of ironic, isn't it? I guess he became an archer because he had to exist. He had to kill what he ate. And so he became an archer. And in verse 20, God was with the lad. He grew, lived in the wilderness, became an archer. He lived in the wilderness of Paran, and his mother took a wife for him from the land of Egypt. Okay, that's it. That's the end of that story right there. Okay, and so Ishmael is out of the picture now. Okay? And so it loses now. And guess who comes back on the scene? Abimelech comes back in. Abimelech has been watching Abraham all this time. And all of a sudden he said, boy, this guy Abraham must be a man of God. He's successful at everything he does. I want some of that. We're not going to go into this one. And he said, I want some of that. So he goes to Abraham and he says to him, let's have a covenant so that you won't be mean to me. I know that you are blessed by God. You can probably do anything you want, but would you make a covenant with me? And Abraham said, well, yeah, I'll make a covenant with you. And so they have a covenant. They exchange livestock. And Abraham sets out in verse 28, 7 ewe lambs. What's a ewe lamb? I had to go back and look at that. Remember, I'm not a sheep guy at home. Ann is a sheep girl. She's great. I had to find out what the difference between a ewe and a ram is. Okay? And a wether. I mean, none of you know what a wether is. Anybody know what a wether is? Well, I'm not going to tell you. Okay, you know. Yeah. And so a wether is is a male with a different persuasion. Let's put it that way. Okay? And but the lamb can or cannot have horns. This lamb, what? This lamb had horns. Okay? And so the one earlier in the vision. And so therefore they called that place Beersheba because there were 2 of them who took an oath, made a covenant at Beersheba. Abraham planted a tamarisk tree. Why? You know, that's, as far as we know, the only thing that Abraham ever planted, permanent. He evidently lived in tents all of his life. But he planted a tamarisk tree. Anybody ever hear of a tamarisk tree? Yeah, Ron, what have you heard one? Do you?
Minnesota, I have them up there.
Okay.
It looks like an evergreen,
Uh-huh.
but it loses its leaves during the winter.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's somebody said it's kind of like a salt cedar. I don't know. Is that sort of right? Yeah. Have all over Saudi Arabia. So he started a trend down there, didn't he? Oh, he probably dug up one and planted it. Why did he plant a tamarisk tree? Have you any idea? The only thing we know is because it was a sort of a sign of the covenant. You know, that's just their sign of their agreement to each other. So he planted this tamarisk tree at Beersheba, and there he called on the name of the Lord, the everlasting God. Abraham sojourned in the land of the Philistines for many days. Now, we later on know a lot about the Philistines. Right now, we don't know a lot about them, except that's where Abimelech was. He was either king or pharaoh of that land or something. All right, then we get to chapter 22, the offering of Isaac. It came about, in chapter 22, verse 1, it came about after these things that God tested Abraham. If you see that, what does that suggest to you? God knows everything. What's he doing? I'm not meaning that as a real complicated type question, but what's he testing? Yeah, he's testing whether Abraham really believes him or not. Because back in chapter 12 and various times since, he's made him a promise. I'm going to give you a son. I'm going to make you have so many descendants as the stars of the sky and the sands of the sea. And so I want to see I've given you a son. We'll just see how faithful you are. I don't mean that to sound disparaging to God or anything like that. But it came about these things that God tested Abraham and said to him, Abraham. And Abraham said, well, here I am. I think that's kind of an interesting expression. Yeah, here I am. And he said, I want you now to take your son, your only son, not Ishmael, but Isaac, whom you love, Isaac, and go to the land of Moriah. Have we ever heard of the land of Moriah before? Yeah, we've heard of it. That's where Solomon's Mount, Solomon's Temple is made. I understand. I don't know that. I've never been there. I've never traveled there. But anyhow, go to the land of Moriah, and I want you to offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains of which I tell you. Whoa. I wonder how Abraham took that initially. Yeah. Knowing Abraham, okay, we'll do it. Okay. Matter of fact, he believed so strongly in God that I think he probably said, okay. Because we know in Hebrews, Abraham really thought what? Yeah, he gave him back to me. Yeah, he'll give him back to me. I'll sacrifice him and God will raise him up. Now this whole story is a prefigure of Christ, isn't it? I mean, if you look at it, this is Christ all over again. There's so many elements in here about Jesus, our sacrifice. But and I jumped the gun a while ago and I talked about the ram's horn and all that because that's coming now, not back there. So Abraham rose early in the morning. You know, early in the morning. You know, they must have been morning people. You know, I'm not a morning person, but he got up early in the morning. He was going to do what God said. Saddled up his donkey. Donkey? You ever hear that? You ever hear where that comes in before? You think Christ, remember? How did Christ come in the last triumphant entry to Jerusalem? On a donkey, okay? Saddled his donkey and took 2 of his young men with him and Isaac his son, and he split wood for the burnt offering. What did he do with the wood? I mean, eventually we know what he did with it, but what did he do with the wood right then? Yeah, who carried the wood? Isaac. Who carried the cross? I mean, you think about all these similarities in here, okay? With him, Isaac his son, he split wood for the burnt offering, rose and went to the place which God had told him on Mount Moriah. On the what day? Third day. That ring a bell? You know, third day when Christ resurrected. On the third day, by the way, I don't think that's an accident. I think that's providential, what we're talking about here. That is given to us for a lesson from the Old Testament. On the third day, Abraham raised his eyes and he saw the place from a distance. So he looked out, you know, he was wandering around the wilderness there. All of a sudden he sees this mountain, okay? Abraham said to his young men, I want you guys to stay here with the donkey, and I and the lad will go over there and we will worship and return to you. Okay, that makes sense? Okay. Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering, laid it on Isaac, as I said a minute ago, his son, and he took in his hand the fire and the knife. So the 2 of them walked on together. And Isaac spoke to Abraham his father and said, my father. What did Jesus say to his father on the cross? You know, my father. My father. And he said, here I am, my son. I guess outside or something. He said, here I am. In other words, what do you want, son? And he said, behold, the fire and the wood. He was a smart kid. Where is the lamb for the burnt offering? Now remember, a lamb is a special lamb was chosen for sacrifice. Remember? On the very day that Christ was killed, crucified, there was a lamb being offered in the temple at the very same time. I mean, there are so many similarities between Christ, his death, his resurrection, even the very hour of the day, the very hour that the priest was offering the lamb as sacrifice in the temple, Jesus was being sacrificed on the cross, the very day, very hour of that day. There's no accident on these things. These are all predestined by God. Abraham said, God will provide for himself the lamb for the burnt offering, my son. Where did he get that idea? That's his faith speaking, isn't it? I don't know. God didn't tell him that. He just knew God was going to take care of this from the very beginning. So the 2 of them walked on together. When they came to the place which God had told him, verse 9, Abraham built the altar there, arranged the wood, bound his son Isaac, and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. How hard would that have been? This son of promise, God is going to have Abraham, his father, take his life.
I wonder what his son thought.
I'm sorry?
What his son thought.
Yeah. What makes you wonder, doesn't it?
Yeah, some people say, now, wait a minute.
Yeah. As far as we know, he doesn't say anything, does he? He's meek as a lamb. Okay? That's what Jesus did. He went as meek as a lamb. I mean, there's so many comparisons here. Abraham stretched out his hand. What does that mean to you? Yeah, he's getting ready to however that happens, he was getting ready to take the life of his own son. And he said, and then as soon as he did that in verse 11, but the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven and said, Abraham, Abraham. And Abraham said, well, here I am. And he said, do not stretch out your hand against the lad, and do nothing to him. For now I know that you fear God, since you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. So Abraham raised his eyes and looked, and behold him, a ram. Now what's a ram?
A boy.
That's a male,
Male.
isn't it? That's a male. Okay. Behind him a ram, caught in the thicket by his horns. So this ram had horns. Not all rams have horns. I read that. I didn't know that. Anne would have known that. I'll tell you, the first time I ever saw a big old ram in her sheep patch, whatever it is. What is it? Herd. I thought, that thing was huge. I mean, it's a great big thing. Oh my goodness. I'm not going to get away with that thing. I've never seen anything like that. I've never seen a dog that big. But anyhow, he took the ram, caught in the thicket by his horns. Abraham went, took the ram, offered him up as a burnt offering in the place of his son. So Abraham called the name of that place, the Lord will provide. As it is said to this day, in the mount of the Lord it will be provided. Verse 15. Then the angel of the Lord called Abraham a second time. Abraham. I just imagined what that sounded like. By myself I have sworn, declares the Lord, because you have done this thing, and have not withheld your son, your only son. Indeed, I will greatly bless you. I mean, he's already told him that, but he's telling him again with great assurance. I'm glad that Abraham would have heard that. I will greatly multiply your seed as the stars of the heaven, the sand which is on your seashore, and your seed shall possess the gate of their enemies. And in your seed all the nations of the earth shall be blessed, because you have obeyed my voice. Not just Abraham's seed is going to be blessed, but the nations of the earth. Guess who that is? That's us. And how are we blessed because of Abraham?
Relationship with God.
That's right. I mean, it's Christ's blood. God promised his blood, the blood of Christ, for us. And Abraham obeyed the father of faith, and we adopt his faith and his belief in that same way. And oh my goodness, I'm 2 minutes late here. And so anyhow, all of a sudden he hears at the end of this chapter, somebody tells him, hey, your brother has had some more kids. What's the significance of that? Is there one name in that list that stands out? Anybody want to look at that list? It's the name Rebecca. Where does that come in?
Isaac's wife.
Isaac's wife. So, I mean, it's stuck in there because that's the plan of God. By the way, I didn't get to Galatians chapter 4. Galatians chapter 4 is a direct tie-in to this series of events where Hagar and Sarah are compared to the old law and the new law of Christ. If you get a chance, read that. It is extremely powerful to show that stop obeying the old law because that's from a bondservant. That comes through Hagar. We obey Christ, and we rejoice in the heavenly Jerusalem, not the old Jerusalem. I mean, it's a whole new approach that Paul uses in the book of Galatians chapter 4. Okay? All right. Well, thank you. Pick up with Dewey's real teaching next week, okay?